And of course, we have a special guest star, a YouTube personality in the house, Tom Ritchie, the one and only.
Hey there,
Yes,
everybody. All right, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Paul.
absolutely. Absolutely. I always enjoy these, we get together and kind of throw some ideas back and forth. You and I have, different approaches to teaching Euro, and I think we play well with each other.
Yeah, I think
So
it's much less stressful to have somebody that you're passing back and forth with. So, it's good to be here and looking forward to hanging out a little bit and answering some questions.
yeah. So the big idea here is, from my student standpoint, is tomorrow they have a cumulative test that's going to cover all of basically the 15th and 16th centuries, covering the Renaissance, the Northern Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Age of Exploration and Colonization. So we're going to kind of go through some things. We'll fill in with some overviews and kind of help you guys out understanding this stuff, and spend as much time as we need to make sure that everybody's kind of ready for this. I don't know where you are in your classes, but my classes are getting ready to jump in. Tom, where are you guys in your class?
We are getting started with the Reformation. So we tend to take it kind of slow at first. I've got, 10th graders taking their first AP course. So I like to kind of move slow with the content, get the skills going and all of that. So, we are starting the Reformation and we'll pick up from there.
Nice, nice. All right, well, Zoeb Carrasco has a question for us. Could you please talk about the Northern Renaissance? And the Northern Renaissance, a lot of times what you want to do is you want to make sure that you understand the difference between the Northern and the Italian Renaissance. And the way I think about this is that the Northern Renaissance is often referred to as the Christian Renaissance. So while the Italians are themselves Christian, the big emphasis in the Italian Renaissance is on discovery of the classics to try and sort of revive this old style of learning. They're looking at the past, they're surrounded by the ruins, they're sort of feeling that, Italy's not as strong as it once was, and so, they're reviving these old manuscripts and they're looking back at old ideas and trying to sort of implement them in a humanist way into sort of a rediscovery of the value of humanity. In the Northern Renaissance, that same scholarship, that same curiosity, that same study of Greek and Latin is sort of turned not towards ancient Greek texts or ancient Roman texts, but also, or more importantly, is turned towards the interpretation and retranslation of the Bible and the writings of ancient or like early Christian thinkers. And so it's an attempt to try and find a more pure and maybe a more original Christianity that existed at the very beginning. And the most famous Northern Renaissance figures are Erasmus and Thomas More, both of whom you should really know going into the AP exam. Erasmus is sort of like the big thinker, and he really is a guy who approaches sort of scholarship for the sake of scholarship. It's all about, translating for truth, searching for truth, looking for that ultimate road to salvation, and he sees within his own Catholic Church a lot of problems, and so he spends time looking back and trying to see where those problems may have originated. But he's always at his heart a Catholic, and it's almost tragic in a way, and it's almost ironic in a way that he's the one that opens the door for Luther's Reformation and for everyone else's Reformation. But when I think of Northern Renaissance, I think of those writings, like taking the ancient Greek and Roman texts of the New Testament and then retranslating them, and in Erasmus's case, even adding commentary so that he can explain what things really mean and making it available to people all around Northern Europe. Tom, is that a good summation there? Or?
Yeah, pretty comprehensive, and I think like you really identified as far as what's going to need to be on the test. Because it's really about not just knowing what's there, but being able to compare and contrast to the Northern Renaissance. I've got a couple videos now. I've got one on the Northern Renaissance that I made a few years ago, and then a brand new one where I'm specifically making that comparison. And one thing students need to realize is like, what Paul's saying is about here are the characteristics of the Northern Renaissance, but then when he talks about that a more Christian approach to those same humanist studies. And that's really when you're comparing those two, you always want to remember the similarity. And a lot of the a lot of the points that are left on the table at the reading are because people are not doing that. They're not making both of those, the comparisons and the contrast. But yeah, I think that's something that's been pretty well hit in videos. Feel free, just type in Northern Renaissance and you'll see my Northern Renaissance video first, and then a few videos down, you'll see my comparison of the two Renaissance movements.
Yeah, so I think we both have those videos up there, so you can look at those and check that all out. We have visitors here, first time on for Brooklyn Nights. We have Desi, who is obviously a Tommy fan. I'm not sure if they're talking about The Who or if they're talking about you. I'm assuming they're talking about you here. And one of my students has showed up. This is great. And a shout out from Hershey. Calvin, welcome out here. Let's see. Victor wants to know, is there a trick to remembering people with the same names, i.e. the War of the Three Henrys? This is where I think the new method of teaching European history really has improved things, because in the old days, and the old days being 2 years ago, we would have to sort of cover every single person and event that we could possibly cover in the course of a year in order to make sure that we covered everything, so that if it was on the test, then you guys were covered. But this year and last year, they've narrowed it down to the really sort of need to know things. And in the War of the Three Henrys, the only Henry that you have to know is Henry of Navarre, who ultimately becomes Henry IV. This is the guy who establishes the Bourbon monarchy. He's the one who is the politique, the one who puts politics ahead of religion in a time of religious wars, and the one who famously says Paris is worth a mass. In other words, converting from his Huguenot Calvinist background to Catholicism is, he understands, the only way to hold France together and to hold on to his power as king there. So I wouldn't worry about the three Henrys. I've also noticed, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that very recently there's been a real push on the AP exam to specify countries that people are from. Now, for those of you who don't know sort of the basics of how you name kings and queens and princes and all of that, I mean, they all have first names and last names. So Louis the 14th is Louis Bourbon, but because he is the 14th Louis that is King of France, when he takes the crown, he becomes Louis the 14th. And so if there's Louis the 14th of France, there will only be one Louis the 14th of France. Of course, I mean, little tricks. If it's Henry, anything from the 8th on is probably going to be English. If it's the 4th, then it's probably French. If it's anyone named Louis, you just go French. If it's anyone named Frederick, you just go Prussian. I know we're jumping ahead in time periods here, but you can kind of grab those little hints out there and take care of them. Tara May has a question. What would you say is the biggest outcome or benefit for Europe from the exploration of the New World? She's trying to write an LEQ. Biggest benefit, Tom. You want to take biggest benefit's a tough word on this one, a little bit of a
Yeah.
loaded.
Now, one thing, Paul, I'd kind of put in addendum on what you were saying. Like, even with the old exam format, I think sometimes there's a little bit of a myth that we had to teach, all of that stuff. But, even with the old exam, like you said, if there's a guy named Frederick, like, when it's like, I just said, look, the Prussian rulers are Frederick William or Frederick William, and you never have to differentiate one from another. So, yeah, and the same thing, the War of the Three Henrys. Agree 100%. As far as the age of exploration, now, if you'll look at what I just put, you know what? I'm going to tweet a link to my need to know handout for the age of exploration. This is something I'd like to make more of these, only so many hours in a day. But I'm going to go ahead and age of exploration, need to know. This is a series of handouts that I want to put out there. And really, I'm trying to create handouts where it's one page that, pretty much tells you everything that you would strictly speaking need to know for the AP exam. And so I think as far as the benefit, the biggest benefit here is you've got more luxury goods cheaper. Okay. Because when you think about spices, silks, sugar, only the wealthiest people in Europe were able to afford those things before the age of exploration, because there were so many middlemen that, by the time it got to Spain, to Portugal, to France, to England, only the wealthiest people could afford them, and they were scarce. Now, today, you can go to the store and you can get a little thing of cinnamon for like, what, $1, if even that. I mean, I don't know how much it costs, but it's not that expensive. So that's the thing. Really, a wider variety of luxury goods available cheaper.
Yeah, and I think also you have to look at the benefit. I mean, and obviously we're talking about the benefit to Europe here because there are certainly not lots of negatives, but there's certainly a benefit to Europe in terms of the new products which show up and the new foods which are available. You have the tomato, which for Italian food is like, I mean, it makes it. You have the potato, which it allows the Irish to thrive off of a one crop system on very small plots of land. So there are those things. Corn comes across and becomes very big. The turkey, I mean, it doesn't make big inroads in Europe, but I kind of like turkey, so I'm just gonna kind of go with it. But just like Tom, now Tom and I, again, we take slightly different tacks on things. But I'm just going to share with you my screen here real quickly, because what I want to do is show you guys my website, because when I let's see. No, this is the wrong screen. Hold on, screen share. When I go to this, right? Nope, I'm sharing the same thing. All right, hold on. Me and my internet prowess. I'm just going to give you the whole screen here and bring this up. But if you guys can, Tom, can you see my screen here?
Let's see what I've got here. Yes, I'm able
Okay.
to see your website.
All right, so this is my website, and if you look at European history, I mean, I go through the historical thinking skills. They're all there laid out for you. The historical themes, the concept outline, so you can read it for yourself and see exactly what's being set up. But when it comes to something like exploration and colonization, and this is a work in progress, so please bear with me. But I've created study guides for each one of the units, and if you download them, what I've done is I've taken items from the curriculum outline and sort of put them into question forms, so that they're good for study purposes and things like that. But they really target exactly what it is you're supposed to know, and kind of leave some of the other stuff out of it. So if you're so inclined, that's all free on my website, and you can access it as you'd like. So we'll get back out of that and back to the live thing here. Let's see. So Desi says, let's see, I got a unit test on Friday. What should I study? Oh, Terame, you're welcome. I'm trying to do those. Those will keep coming out. Again, they're a work in progress. But Desi, you have a unit test. Well, we don't exactly know what's on the unit test. But if it's on sort of the Renaissance, Reformation, exploration, what I would do is start off by making sure that you know sort of the key ideas here. You know, what is the Renaissance all about? What is the Reformation all about? What is exploration all about? And understanding the key people and understanding the key events that go into that and how they relate to one another. And you know, if you're working on historical thinking skills, then you're going to be spending a lot of time kind of comparing and contrasting, trying to put things in the right periods, trying to contextualize in a larger sense what's going on. And if you look at these three concepts, the Renaissance, Reformation, and exploration, like one thing that's tough to understand is that they all are happening pretty much at the exact same time. And so there's so much overlap time-wise that it becomes, you know, a little bit confusing, you know. We have a period between, for example, Columbus's discovery of the New World and Cortez's conquest of Mexico. And in the meantime, Martin Luther is hammering 95 Theses on the door of the church at Wittenberg, and Michelangelo is designing St. Peter's Cathedral. So it's like all kind of happening simultaneously. They're all playing off each other. And you know, so we historians periodize things in order to kind of say like, okay, let's put all this information together because it makes sense together, and it overlaps time-wise, but if you understand it as a thing, then it makes it a little bit sort of easier to comprehend. All right, Haley, how did innovations in banking promote the growth of urban financial centers and the new economic elite? Tom, you want to jump in on banking, or do you want me to take this one?
That's the thing about being the guest, you get all the good ones. Yeah, as far as that goes, you know, banking. Now, for one thing, you know, during the Middle Ages, usury. USURY. This is a practice basically of lending money with interest. You know, in the Middle Ages, which were controlled by the church, you know, Jesus had this great advice, which, you know, if Jesus ever asked you to go into business with him, please politely decline as politely as you can. Because he said, you know, a lot of times people wonder when they're going to get paid back or how much interest. Jesus said, you should lend money without even worrying about being paid back. And so the church took that as you can't lend money with interest if you're a Christian. And so that's why Jews were so involved in lending money during the Middle Ages. Now, as things start to, two things happen with the Renaissance. Things start to secularize a bit, so the church has a little less direct control. But the other thing is that interest rates start going down, that people are willing to, there's less risk involved in lending money. And so people can lend it at lower rates. And so the rates weren't quite so predatory, you know, rates that would cause people to, hey, the Black Death's coming into town. That's a great excuse to kill the town Jew so that we don't have to owe the town Jew any money. And so you don't have that so much anymore. Now, the Medici, you know, were probably your most prominent Christian bankers that arrive on the scene, and that creates wealth for those families, which of course they patronize the arts. Now, the other thing about banking is now whether I want to be elected pope or if I want to start a shipping company, if I've got a good enough idea, it's like I can go to the Medici Bank and I can ask for them to back me. I can ask for them to make an investment. So you start to see capital come together. And that's really what kind of drives the Renaissance. It's like the only way that you can paint things and sculpt things is you've got to have a lot of surplus wealth coming in. And so this commerce that you see in Italy in a lot of cases is, you know, is driving the Renaissance. So I think it's important to note the whole, you know, causal relationship there. And you've got the commercial revolution and all of this, where it's just the way of doing business is changing, which, you know, kind of brings in what we think of as the modern world. That, you know, it's like we have different ways of doing business than they had in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, and it's also important to understand that when these families start creating these banks, whether it's the Medici or whether it's the Fugger banks or whether it's, you know, whoever, where the family is, they start loaning out, and as they start expanding, they're making huge amounts of money by doing this, but they also start making huge loans out to monarchs, these new monarchs which are trying to consolidate power at the same time need money in order to do that, especially to maintain standing armies and fight wars, and, you know, in the case of Spain, you know, drive the Muslims and the Jews out of the country to finance exploration. I mean, all these things cost cash. And so they start borrowing cash. Well, the problem with borrowing cash is this is not Game of Thrones, where like the bank is the thing that you really, really fear, because yeah, right, the Iron Bank. But you know, some of these monarchs who just simply run out of money, they just turn to the banks like the Medici and they say, "No, we're just not paying you back. It's just not going to happen. And if you want your money, well, come and get it." And they can't do it. They don't have the resources. And so it really does, I mean, it's a risky involvement when you start getting at that level, because it does lead to the downfall of some of these families who have been very powerful in the banking industry. But it makes them this new economic elite, and they are, as Tom said, patronizing the arts and all of that. But they're also having what the traditional elite don't have, which is disposable cash. The traditional aristocracy has land, and that's like where wealth was sort of like the source of wealth during the Middle Ages. But now there's cash flowing around there, and cash buys you nice things like spices and nice silk clothes and all of this. And so the aristocracy starts passing laws that basically outlaw the wearing of certain things and the use of certain things by the middle class. You know, for example, the color purple, you know, absolutely prohibited to wear unless you're born into the aristocracy. And so the economic elite is coming into conflict with the old medieval like hierarchy of society that has three estates, in which these economic elite, no matter how powerful and wealthy they are, they're still peasants. They're the third estate, so to speak, of the old system. So it's starting to create this social conflict, which is going to come to a head, you know, as this course goes on. Let's see. Real quickly, I just lost it on the screen, but we had a question about the most important people in the exploration age from Haley. This one I actually answered online with some teachers today. Looking at the curriculum guidelines, really there's three explorers that you need to know: Columbus, Cortez, Pizarro. That's it. Columbus discovers the New World, but discovers, right? Discovers the New World. Hernan Cortez is the man who conquers the Aztec Empire, and Francisco Pizarro is the guy who conquers the Incan Empire. And beyond that, in terms of explorers and navigators and things like that, they're not mentioned in the testable areas. They're nice to know. It's great to tell the story about Magellan circumnavigating the Earth, which he didn't actually do, although we give him credit for. It's great to study the travels of James Cook and Francis Drake, but if you're really sort of focusing on what's going to be on the test, they're not going to be there.
Now, then again, Paul, they could put that up there as a stimulus item or something like that. So sometimes when they, you know, because they do a similar thing in South Carolina for our state U.S. history test, where they say, oh, this is what's going to be tested. And then they throw something on there and it's like, oh, well, strictly speaking, you didn't have to know that. So, but as far as whether they would have, yeah, I mean, the names or something like that. But we will see some people who aren't there, and then all of a sudden, like, bam, it's on the test. Not that you and I would ever know, but the students may encounter it.
Right. And you may have like a document by Bartolomeo de las Casas, for example, which would talk about mistreatment of Native Americans, but it wouldn't require you to know who Bartolomeo de las Casas was outside of the attribution that's given on the sort of stimulus document itself. At least that's my understanding. Please correct me if I'm
Yeah, and
wrong.
the thing is, I think strictly speaking, you're right. I mean, I tend to approach it as far as like, and that's the thing. There's so many ways to skin a cat with this, but I tend to approach it as I tell the students. Really, the most important thing is no matter who you know. Now, knowing those people is important because they're on that list. But also keeping in mind that the most important thing to know is, a couple of explorers that you have something quality to say, because when you think about the SAQ, the DBQ, the LEQ, then if you've got some specific knowledge about Vasco da Gama and how, he went to India and, set up a colony, that sort of thing. If you've got that, or with Prince Henry the Navigator, it's like that kind of stuff is very valuable to you on the DBQ and the LEQ and the SAQs. And that's really where you get into a section of the exam, which is really what, like 60% of the exam, where pretty much all evidence is equal, as far as that goes. So it's kind of a tightrope line or something like that. But even if you think about it, it's like, okay, well, Columbus, Pizarro, and Cortez. If you get some really in-depth knowledge about that, you can use those guys in your LEQ or your DBQ. So, you're definitely winning if you prioritize with those people.
Yeah, and now is probably a good time for me to put a disclaimer out here. Questions about the actual reading and how it goes down are totally Tom's realm here, because we have our graduation. It's a very special experience at my school, and it's a real, we develop some really tight relationships with students. So I've never been able to attend the reading. Tom is, at the reading all the time, so he has a better insight into how these things are being scored, and I'm getting sort of secondhand knowledge about that and reading things like that. So, Tom, if you don't mind, when it comes down to those scoring reading questions, I am going to pass them on to you, because otherwise I'd honestly just be making stuff up, and that wouldn't help anyone. All right, so let's see, what do we have? Nishaya. Nishaya is with us. How you doing, darling? Let's see. The Edict of Nantes. Okay, so the Edict of Nantes is this great politique piece of legislation. It's passed by Henry IV, Henry of Navarre of France. And what it is it kind of puts to rest, at least temporarily, this conflict between Catholics and Huguenots. And it legitimizes Huguenot beliefs in France. By the way, Huguenots are French Calvinists, and it gives them freedom of religion, and it even gives them access to fortified cities that they can use in order to protect themselves if they need to. It's extremely important, because it shows that the prevailing notion that you only can have a unified country if you have one religion for your entire country isn't necessarily like the only way to do it. You can have multiple religions without a nation falling apart. Of course, this is all taken apart by his son, who goes around, son, grandson, getting a little confused because I haven't gotten into the Louis yet, but Louis the 14th, I believe, revokes this. Am I right on that one, Tom, or is it
Louis the
13th?
14th, yes, Louis the
Yeah.
14th and his edict of Fontainebleau or Fountainebleau or whatever you want to say it. But yeah, basically, and you don't have to know the name of it for the exam. But yes, Louis the 14th. Remember, one king, one law. Well, yeah, one king, one law, not two faiths, one faith. Okay, so Louis the 14th was in a, really. Now, one thing that was interesting, like Paul, I get once in a while some French people get really upset, like at some of my AP Euro videos, and I'm talking about France. They're very particular about their history. We don't really have to study for AP Euro, even though we've heard of these, like kind of the continuation of the French Wars of Religion under like Louis the 14th, Louis the 13th and Cardinal Richelieu. Somebody was telling me, I need to kind of verify a bit of this, but this Frenchman seemed to really know what he was talking about. He really took me to task for my video, but he said that before Louis the 13th's edict, I forget the edict of something that ended those particular wars of religion, that Catholicism was actually banned in the Huguenot cities, like the cities that Henry IV gave to the Huguenots, that those were places that were like, you didn't have Catholic churches in those cities. But then under Louis the 13th, the next king, part of that peace settlement was, the nobles, especially Huguenot nobles and the Huguenot towns, they were to take down all of their fortifications and they were to allow the practice of Catholicism. And so you see that basically after the wars of religion, there's, which it's just some interesting context, that finally Louis the 14th is in a position of enough strength to rescind the Edict of Nantes. And really, when it comes down to it, a lot of that has to do with, because he can. That's the thing that really it's hard to believe, like in the United States. But when it comes down to it, Louis's ban of the Huguenot religion was actually very well received. Now, if you wanted to get into synthesis, the majority of Americans, depending on how the question is asked, but depending on it, because polling, Paul teaches government as well, polling has a lot of bearing on how the question is asked. But when, like people are asked about Donald Trump's proposal to have a temporary ban on Muslim immigration, more people agree with that in the United States than disagree with it. So, when it comes to Louis saying, look, the Catholic religion is going to be the only religion in France, and there's an unpopular religious minority. And keep in mind here, an unpopular religious minority that people still equate with things like, St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and that sort of thing, where they remember those wars of religion. And Louis saying, look, that's not happening anymore. And also, you got to remember that Louis the 14th was, he was a power hungry guy, but he was also a devout Catholic. And I think that's something that's important to note too, that as part of the divine right of kings, Louis felt like, hey, I've got an obligation to be a shepherd to my people. I've got to answer to Jesus. So that's getting you a little bit ahead, a little preview of what's coming. But just some interesting stuff I learned from a Frenchman earlier this week.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great stories that go in behind these, and this honestly, and I think Tom, you probably have the same problem, is that I kind of have taken this curriculum outline to heart, because otherwise I just end up going off on story after story after story after story, and I just don't cover everything. I can't get into everything because I just love telling stories. The stories are so great. And so I try and sort of, limit myself and try and limit my storytelling time, because AP Euro can very easily turn into a storytelling extravaganza, especially when you get into interesting sort of stories like that,
Yeah.
Um, all right, please review exploration, or sorry, Elena Casas, what led to the Spanish Golden Age. Well, the Golden Age in Spain really is this age which is brought along. It's ironically named the Spanish Golden Age, even though it's not brought about by gold. It's brought about by silver, mostly silver coming from mines in Mexico, which gives them amazing amounts of wealth. And the Spanish kings, and especially, I mean, and this is where, these concepts of periods overlap. Charles V, who is the Holy Roman Emperor, but also the King of Spain at the same time, he uses a lot of the Spanish silver, or the Mexican silver, which I guess is Spanish silver, to go out and finance these religious wars that he's fighting to not only maintain Catholicism throughout Southern Europe and fight off the influx of Lutheranism and Zwingliism and Calvinism and all of this, but also to sort of hold the Netherlands in check and keep them part of the empire. And they spend and spend and spend and spend, that puts a whole lot of silver onto the market. They are, without a doubt, at the time, the most powerful, the wealthiest, the greatest country of Europe. But overspending and putting all of that new currency, all that new silver into circulation, inflates the value, causes inflation. It deflates the value of silver, and it leads to the collapse of the Spanish Empire as a great thing, which is not exactly aided by the fact that their entire armada gets destroyed off the coast of England. So all of these things kind of come together. But that golden age is when Spanish exploration has taken over the New World. Money is flowing in. Spain is the dominant power, and they're using that power to try and push Catholicism throughout Europe and try and stave off the Protestant Reformation, which ultimately they fail to do in the larger scheme of things. Let's see. So we've got some comments here. Review the exploration. The exploration is a very large thing to review. Taylor, if you have a more specific question, they tend to help a little bit. Otherwise, Tom and I'll sit here and talk for half an hour and ignore all the other questions that are coming along as we, explore and colonize. So Haley wants to know the Queen Elizabeth's biggest accomplishment and a summary of the Spanish Armada. So I don't know, Tom, Queen Elizabeth's biggest accomplishment, I'm going to go with her ability to reconcile the English Reformation in England. I guess that's kind of redundant, but the problem with what had happened was Henry VIII, the very famous story, he had broken with the Catholic Church on the basis of the fact that he really wanted a divorce from his Catholic bride, Catherine of Aragon, who, by the way, let's interconnect again, is the daughter of Francis and Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, the two of the new monarchs that you tend to talk about with the Renaissance. So anyway, he starts the Anglican Church. He breaks with the Catholic Church. Doesn't change a whole lot about anything that they do, other than the fact that instead of a pope being at the top, it's the king at the top. But he doesn't live forever. He dies. He has three children. His son, Edward, takes over. And Edward is really at heart a Calvinist. He really wants to change the Church of England, get rid of all of the finery, all of the ceremony, and turn it into like a very, I hesitate to say Puritan, but pure sort of Calvinist religion, which focuses on Bible readings and gets rid of decoration in churches and all of that. He lives a very short life. He's followed by his half sister Mary, who takes the throne. She's a big Catholic, so then she goes and tries to impose Catholicism back on England. And, well, she dies too, and her half-sister, Elizabeth, takes the throne, and Elizabeth takes sort of a middle road. Again, she's one of those politiques like Henry, where she says, the strength of England is more important than the religion, and so she establishes a church which is not Calvinist, but it is Protestant. So has enough of the Catholic, practices and whatnot to appease the Catholics and to sort of bring everyone together, which is great, and she's doing a great job and all of that. But of course, everybody dies. She dies, but she dies without an heir because she married England. And so, yeah, then we jump in with Stuarts who come down from Scotland, but that's a whole different story. Um, so, would you agree that's her biggest accomplishment, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think and then fending off, whoever. I mean, that's that. I mean, yeah, that I think when it comes down to it, it's important to note that the English Reformation is such a conservative Reformation, especially under Henry, that there are some people that actually don't even consider Anglicanism Protestant. What I do. I mean, if you think about it, if you want to get into like comparison or synthesis or whatever you want to call it. A lot of times when I'm talking about the English Reformation, I being from the South, compare this to the Confederate States of America during the Civil War, where it's basically a secession from the Catholic Church. It's not like Luther or Calvin, where they're doing all of this new doctrine and putting in new practices. But Henry's just that. I mean, the act of supremacy just basically says, look, the English church is effectively seceding from the Church of Rome, and the king is the supreme head of the church. And so that's what Henry really had in mind. And what Paul said, and I would just kind of just clean that up by just saying that Edward was a little bit more friendly to actual Protestants. If you think about Anglicanism as its own thing, and it's really fair to talk about that in the sense of a conservative Reformation, that Henry, so Edward is, commissions the Book of Common Prayer. You've got Archbishop Cranmer. And so then, yeah, you've got a lot of different factions there that after Mary is, Bloody Mary is, murdering people, executing people, whatever you want to call it, that there's a lot of bad blood there. And Elizabeth being able to hold the throne for as long as she was, after having her sickly brother who was on the throne for less than 10 years, her sister who was on the throne for less than 10 years, and to be able to stand up to Philip II, who by some standards had an effective claim on the English throne. I mean, Philip II had been married to Mary the First. And so he said, look, I mean, I am the queen's husband. I have a case to be king. And Philip, Philip was the most powerful man in Europe at the time. And Elizabeth was able to do that. So, we were good. But any, or we, or the English, or whatever. I'm from, I guess originally my ancestors were over there at the time. So, maybe I feel a little commonality. But I think really just the fact that she was able to reign for as long as she was. And remember that a woman had never really effectively ruled in England. I don't think you can really consider Mary just because of the shortness of her reign. So you really, I mean, she set a standard there to where nobody was going to say like, oh, a woman can't be queen, and it's like, okay, now, of course, now this is very recent, but in the last 5 years or so, Parliament has actually redone the rules of succession so that if George and Charlotte had been in reverse, if Charlotte had been born first, then she would be in line first. Whereas used to, before this most recent act, a male would always inherit before a female. Like the only reason Elizabeth II is queen right now is because she didn't have any eligible male siblings. So that's no longer the case. And I think that Elizabeth I, you could say she kind of set a precedent for that. And, that's the thing. Elizabeth was able to kind of reconcile these factions together in a way that it's like, what, we're all going to be this one church, but, let's just, that's the thing. And she was pretty effective, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's her effectiveness that I think legitimized the whole thing and put to rest some of the conflicts that originally, like early in her reign, were real concerns with a woman being in charge of a country. And let's be honest. If we're going to synthesize here, there are still concerns in places with women being in charge of countries, and these are coming up in the presidential election that we have right now. There are people who are concerned that Hillary Clinton's being a woman is going to impede her ability to run a country. So while things have changed, they also have stayed the same in many ways. And so, it's always good to have that synthesis thing in there. Although synthesis is kind of a difficult thing to do, without sort of a larger understanding. All right, moving on. Nishaya wants to know how the Spanish system of colonization differed from the Portuguese model. Tom, you want to take the lead on this one, and
I
I'll
mean,
follow up.
it's now one thing I just ask: is this even relevant? Like, as far, I mean, I'm just, there are some things that I get that it's like, what does that really have to do with the exam? I'm not sure, because I know that I mean, when you think about the Spanish, they're not really sending a whole lot of colonists. The Spanish are really focused on on the natives. They've got the encomienda system, which that may be more of a U.S. history kind of thing. And the Portuguese, of course, are very heavily involved in the slave trade. I mean, the Portuguese are like, I mean, as far as that goes, like if you look at maps where, we a lot of times talk about slavery in the United States, and then you realize, like, that was only about 5%, if that most of them were going to Portuguese Brazil. In the Caribbean, but Brazil, like, more than anywhere. So, which you can see when you look at Brazil, like how ethnically, at the Olympics, like how ethnically diverse that country is, as a result of the slave trade. But I've never, Paul, really seen anything. I mean, this is one of those things where sometimes I have to tell students, what, I don't really know a whole lot about what you're asking, and I'm not sure that that's something that would be on the exam in a survey level course, kind of like when somebody's like, how do you tell apart those three Henrys? And the answer is, well, you don't.
Yeah.
So
Well, the curriculum outline does specify, sort of a differentiation between Portuguese, Spanish, French, Dutch, and English colonization in
okay.
terms of like political and social and economic things. So what I
Okay, so the
tend to
bigger
do,
picture, with the bigger picture, it makes more sense. Yeah, but I don't think there's
yeah,
really a lot of differentiation between Spanish and Portuguese per se in their methods of colonization, except that the Portuguese were much more concerned about, as far as they're moving during the age of exploration, they're moving east, whereas the Spanish are much more concerned about the West. And that's why, with the Treaty of Tordesillas and the line of demarcation, that is basically giving the Spanish almost the entirety of the Americas, while the Portuguese get Brazil. Because that, and then basically the Portuguese get, whatever they've got in India and, the East Indies and that sort of thing.
right. And what I try to emphasize with my students is this: the Portuguese go and and their method of colonization, because they don't really colonize, is that they're setting up trading posts. They're basically taking over Muslim trading posts and setting up trading relations with existing peoples that are along the coastline of Africa and India, and setting up trading posts in the Spice Islands over in the East Indies, and doing real trading. The Spanish actually work on a model which is much more like 19th century imperialism, in which they go in and they quote unquote settle the land. They give plots of land to people in order to set up the encomiendas and set up farming industries who have to improve the land and Christianize the natives and all of this. And that's, aside from Brazil, the Portuguese tend to sort of stick to trading and trading posts along a little bit more of the, say, French model of colonization, where it's a very, it's a friendly, mutually beneficial kind of thing, except for the slave trade, which is really hard to say is mutually beneficial, and except for certain people, But you get into some dangerous waters there. So that's the difference that I would make. If you look at Portuguese colonies, and where Portuguese is spoken, it's largely Brazil and Portugal at this point. all of the outposts and all of the trading posts that existed that they set up, that they took from the Muslims, will very soon be taken by the Dutch, and the Dutch will take over the entire spice trade, and the slave trade itself will change hands many, many times before it's finally outlawed. Um, so Mac the Knife wants to know how did exploration start? This one, I just say the Ottomans. The Ottomans started exploration. They took over Constantinople in 1453. They drove out all of the thinkers, which starts the humanist movement in Italy, because the big thinkers grab as many books as they can and as many manuscripts, and they run off to Italy. But it also opens up Ottoman control of the Mediterranean, and so the traditional way that spices had made their way to Europe across the Silk Road and then to the Mediterranean, where Italian traders would then get the spices and bring them to parts of Europe, now that's basically closed off because the Ottomans have taken over the Mediterranean. And so there's a search for a new way to get to these spices, which is more efficient and cheaper and all of that. And they start talking about maybe finding a way around Africa. Now, they're working off old maps. The Roman Empire had contact with Africa, but they hadn't really gone much farther than, the Sahara Desert, because it's kind of hard to, cross. But with new navigational technology, new boats and all of that, the Portuguese start making their way down the African coast and eventually round Africa, find their way to India, find their way into the Spice Islands of Malaysia and Indonesia and all of that, and they start bringing back literally boatloads of spices at far cheaper prices than they were ever available for. So that was the beginning of it. We sort of traditionally attribute a lot of that to the brother of the King of France, Prince Henry the Navigator, who's set up navigation schools and very, very closely guarded as state secrets the maps that were being made of the African coastline. Let's see, the encomienda system and the influence of Cortes. Is our next question. You want to take the encomienda system and I'll take Cortes, or do you want to take Cortes?
Sure. Now, this would be something that I might recommend. I didn't realize. I mean, this is good for me to find out. I mean, evidently there's some overlap. I have a series on this. Now, this isn't in my AP Euro stuff. This is in my A-Push stuff. But if you search for New Spain on YouTube, my video on that will be the first or one of the first that comes up. So if you look up New Spain or New France, I actually have videos about the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English, if you're curious about all that. So essentially, the short version is basically that it's almost like a plantation system with forced labor for the Indians. And of course, Bartolome de las Casas wrote up to the Spanish government about the abuses there. And when you look at De las Casas, you have to remember point of view that De las Casas is a priest. His purpose is to spread the gospel to the natives. And in order to do that, they have to like him. And so when when the natives hate the Spanish, they're not very receptive to converting to their religion. So that's something to consider on all of those fronts. But yeah, if you really want to find out about New Spain, I've got a lecture online that may be helpful to you. And with that, Paul, I think I'm going to call it a night. I think my daughter's about to go to sleep. I'm going to go kiss her goodnight. But I appreciate you having me on here, and I'd be glad to appear on here again. We'll keep in touch and all of that good stuff.
Absolutely, and it's good to have someone that has your knowledge, your expertise, all that, because it's great to get different viewpoints and different piece of information and all of that. I think it helps everybody. So
Oh, definitely.
hopefully,
Likewise. Like I said, I've learned a few things just hearing you talk, and especially about, with some things that you've looked into in the curriculum and all that, that I can take with me. So much appreciation, and look forward to talking with you again, Paul. Good night, everybody.
absolutely. Good night, Tom.
All right.
All right, so I guess I'm on my own here for this, so I'll start making my way through these questions and we'll see how long I last. Zoeb Carrasco, the economic or political effects of the Lutheran states in the Holy Roman Empire. Well, the political effects of this are that there's a division in the Holy Roman Empire. Charles V is the Holy Roman Emperor. He's largely distracted by a lot of things that are going on, including New World prospects, including his war with the Ottomans on the eastern side of Austria, um, and his feud that eventually leads him to sack Rome and basically imprison the king. Meanwhile, all of the Lutheran or all of these different princes in the northern part of the Holy Roman Empire, who are relatively autonomous, they're going to go off and they're going to embrace Lutheranism as sort of an excuse to challenge his authority. They're going to come together in a thing called the Schmalkaldic League. You don't really need to know the name Schmalkaldic League, but they're going to fight it out, and they're going to end up with the Peace of Augsburg. Now, I've got a video that talks about the Peace of Augsburg, but the real simple and dirty is this. They decide that princes can decide which religion their princedom or their area will be. And they get two choices. You can either be Catholic or you can be Lutheran. And it tends to sort of do a north-south divide. The northern provinces tend to go Lutheran and pull away from the influence of the church. And the southern provinces, who are closer to Rome, closer to Austria, they tend to stay with the Catholic. In terms of economic uh, uh, effects here, the economic effects is sort of the division of the Holy Roman Empire into these different sections. And when places go Lutheran, it takes away the ability for the Catholic Church and by extension the Holy Roman Emperor to collect indulgences in those areas and to sort of collect money in those areas. So there are a lot of effects here. But the reality is that Charles can't hold all this together. Now I'm going to take my headphones out because they were here with Tom being on. We were getting feedback, but I'm going to take them out and see if I can get, I shouldn't hear anything else. But if you start hearing feedback, please let me know and I'll put them back. Um, okay, so we got all of that. The Spanish Armada summary is basically this. Philip II decides that after the succession of Elizabeth I, that he and her move to Protestantism, that he and Philip II is known for militant Catholicism, like using armies, and they're funded by all this Mexican silver coming in, using armies to try and keep areas Catholic. So he puts together this massive armada of ships, the biggest thing the world had ever seen. He launches the ships and sends them off to basically take over England and turn it back to a Catholic country. And they fail largely because of weather. The weather gets really bad in the English Channel. Lots of the boats, lots of the ships get disabled. The English Navy is able to fight off many of the rest of them. And in an interesting story, many of the ships that survived made their way around. I'm going to do a little sweep here on your imaginary map of the British Isles. They're going to sweep around the British Isles, around Scotland, and then they're going to get shipwrecked off the coast of Ireland, so that you have these Spanish-Irish people who, they integrate with the society, but they keep a lot of their Spanish traditions and language and stuff like that. So I'm glad that you guys are enjoying this. All the thanks are wonderful. And yeah, we've lost We've lost the star of the show, I guess. The first president of the United States of Europe, Macho Camacho. There is no United States of Europe. If you're talking about the EU, the European Union, first of all, that is way out of where I want to sort of keep the conversation here. But I don't believe that you need to know any of the leaders of the European Union. So I wouldn't even worry about it, other than, that's something that you might Google and find your answer. I can Siri it if you need me to. I got it right here. They'll tell me the answer. You know what? I'm a giver. What can I say? Who was the first head of the European Union?
Checking my sources. Okay, I found this on the web for who was the first head of the European Union.
The president of the European Union or the president of the Europe does not exist, blah, 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 but the term is often used by, this is coming up, to mean either the president of the European Council or the president of the European Commission, or the president of the European Parliament. Yeah. So, yeah. Sorry. Couldn't help you on that one. Tara May is back. Off-topic questions. Sorry, you don't have to tackle it tonight if it gets too late. But do you have any resources or plan to make resources on writing the redesigned DBQ or LEQ? Okay, first of all, I got to say Tom Ritchie's site has great stuff on it. Very good stuff on that. I do have some stuff, so I'll go with a little screen share here again, so that you can see it. And I'll pull up my website again, because I try and put everything out there so that you guys have as much access to everything as possible. Under European history, my goodness, it's getting late. I forgot what you were asking. Redesign DBQ and LEQ. Yes. Right now, all of my things are in the Euro exam review here. But I do have a series of videos on exam prep, how to prepare for the Euro exam. These are largely dedicated to they focus on end of the year things, but you can use them all year. So how do you prepare? How do you survive the AP Euro multiple choice section? How do you attack the AP Euro's short answer section? How do you conquer the document-based question? How do you tackle the long essay question? And then I did some final thoughts on the Euro exam. Those were all put together, plus with some old live hangouts with myself and with Tom Ritchie, that give you some hints on how to go about doing that. Beyond that, I don't believe that I have anything on my site which would really sort of help you along. But I would check Tom Ritchie's site and see what he has there, because that would, he's got a lot of good stuff, and he's really taken the lead on a lot of this. The other thing I would do is look at a review book, whether you're using, and if you don't have one, get a good review book. Get 5 Steps to a 5. Get the Princeton Review, and they'll have sections that talk about different ways to approach DBQs and LEQs and how they're scored and all of that. Tara May, this is my first AP class, and I feel like all my writing is such a mess. I tell my students it's a process. If you're not used to writing like this, it's going to be a mess at the beginning. You got to stick with it. You got to keep practicing it as much as you can, and you have to keep looking for improvement. And in my classes, what I do is I start off, very simply, writing thesis statements, and then pulling documents together to form an argument. And we do it little by little by little by little, in order to try and sort of pull together, so that by like the late winter, we're full on writing DBQs and LEQs that we've spent a lot of time sort of piecing together throughout the year. I'm not saying it's the best way to do it, but that's the way that I kind of do it. So just stick with it. Your writing will get better. Strategies on tackling AP primary sources. Zoeb, and I hope I'm pronouncing Zoeb right. Zoeb, it's the primary sources, really you have to read them, okay? And it depends on where you're looking at them. If you're looking at them in the multiple choice section, then my advice is skip them, okay? Go in and read the questions first that apply to it. Chances are, if there are, let's say, 4 questions that are associated with one primary source or one like stimulus, chances are you can answer 1 or 2 of them if you know what you're doing without reading the source. You know it. But then when you tackle the AP primary sources, you need to keep in mind, first of all, read it and try and get like the gist of what they're saying. And then look at the author and understand how the author can change the credibility of a document and change the meaning of a document. So, we talk about AP POV in my class, and I stole this from Tom Ritchie. I have to admit it. The guy is a genius. So AP POV, and what it is audience, purpose, and point of view. So if you understand who the document is written for, the audience, that's going to affect it. If it's written to a king to ask for money, like a Columbus letter that we read in my class last week or earlier this week, I don't remember, that's going to affect it. If you're asking for money, you're going to, paint the picture of the new world in a pretty nice light. If it's a diary that's written at the time, it might be a little bit more honest because it might not be written for people. If it's a speech, it might be written to try and target, the people who are listening, which would get into the audience. So you got the audience is going to be huge. The purpose of the document, then, why do you write this? No one just sits down and writes because they're bored. They have another motivation in order to do that. So you're figuring out what that motivation is. Are they trying to convince people of things? Are they trying to put forth new ideas? Are they trying to challenge old ideas? Are they trying to, whatever it is, understand the purpose of the document. And then the point of view, you look at what you know about the author and you try and figure out how that could affect what that author's point of view would be. If it's, let's say, the Medici writing to, the Medici, you're going to have to understand that these are wealthy individuals who are involved in banking. They're not aristocracy. They're living in Italy, which is, made up of largely city-states, and so you pull all of this together and you say, so how would this affect their point of view about what they're writing about? And if they're writing about, art, well, then you can say, hey, they've patronized some of the greatest artists the world has ever seen, so they kind of know what they're talking about. And so that should sort of help. We got a shout out to the class of 2016, which is the golden class. Everyone calls themselves the golden class. I don't know why that is, but it's been going on for a very long time. So other questions about Renaissance, Reformation, explanation? Oh, good. I'm glad. Zoev, I'm glad that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Is there anything else that you guys want to know about exploration and colonization and the Renaissance, the Reformation? If you're one of my students and you're still online, we have the test tomorrow. Now's the time to ask the question. You guys are a little bit hesitant sometimes, but you put it out there. Or if you're not one of my students, please feel free to go ahead and throw that out. And now we have a platinum class. Good. I want someone to come out and call themselves the iron class. Something, or the plastic class, and see how it is. Just do something a little bit different. Downgrade it. Just say, hey, we're plastic. I don't know, will be around for a long time. Or manufactured. But the golden class, I like it. It sounds good, right? Sounds good. You put gold on everything. It's great. Makes for really nice graduation parties if you're the golden class, because then you go like, oh yeah, I need gold. Yeah, I'm at a loss for words now because I just am running out of things to say. Yes, plastic is used more than gold. There's a real reason for that. It's a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper. Example, totally have to show this off. My daughter and I put this together the other day. Lego Big Ben. This is made of plastic, people. I'm sort of backwards in my thing. This is made of plastic. If this were made of gold, I wouldn't be holding it because I couldn't afford a Big Ben made of gold. But you get the idea. Okay, let's see. The scientific revolution's impact on religion. Zoeb, this is a great question because it gets to the heart of what is like in the curriculum outline the first the first piece and really the biggest or the simplest way I can put this is that scientists replace priests. In the time prior to the scientific revolution, people look to priests for truth. If they want to know why the heavens are the way they are, they ask a priest. They ask the church. If they want to understand, why the seasons work, they ask the church. It's all about asking the church. The church holds all the answers. And it kind of backs them in a corner sometimes because they have to speak out on things that the Bible doesn't really address and that they don't really have any knowledge of, but they have to make some pronouncement of it for some reason. With the scientific revolution and the introduction of the scientific method created by Francis Bacon and Rene Descartes, you have a very testable thing. And so now, after that, people start relying on scientists for information, and they stop sort of relying on religious people when it comes to earthly matters. And I think we do this today. When we talk about global warming, we ask scientists whether global warming exists. We don't ask priests and pastors and all of that to pray and look in the Bible and see if global warming is a real thing. And we just don't. So, that's the big change that happens there is that shift of who we trust. Nishai is back on Christian humanism. Okay. I answered this for someone else, Nishai, but basically Christian humanism is sort of the application of the methods of humanism, the rediscovery of the languages of Greek and Latin, and applying those to the Bible, especially the New Testament, and the writings of early Christian writers. And the idea is to try and get to a purer, more original form of Christianity, which is something that we as people want to do with everything. There are purists in every single thing. And so that's really the big push here. My advice would be watch my video on Christian humanism because I think I sort of put it down for that. Joshua, I appreciate the shout out there. I'm hoping that this is helping with AP Euro because that's what I enjoy about doing this. It's great to be able to help you guys. It's great to see that it's helping. It makes me feel like I'm teaching far more people than I was ever able to teach before. And I tied in with teaching my own students who I can't teach because I coach cross country and I can teach them, but I can't tutor them after school or anything, which is kind of a big thing at my school. So Gene wants to and Tara May with the guests, Tom's not going to be available every Tuesday. I plan on doing this every Tuesday, at least through cross country season and in the spring and track season, but that leaves the winter, and I'm certainly open to Tuesday nights throughout the year, and make this a thing. But, talk to your teacher and see if your teacher wants to be a guest, because I'm open to the idea of having as many teachers involved in this and as many different voices involved in this as possible, because listening to me has got to get old. Like, you guys have got to be sick of my voice and this stupid blue background that I chose for today, which is wrinkled, but I'm trying. It's a low budget operation. All right. Gene, how did the shift in trade routes from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic change the balance of economic power? Well, it shifted the balance of economic power from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. So these Italian city-states lose all of their economic power. They're taken over by the larger monarchy-driven powers of France and Spain. And then your big players, Italy basically disappears from international politics in any real way until the Crimean War in the mid-1800s. So they're just kind of gone. They're out of it. Trade shifts and economic power shifts to the big countries, which are able to monopolize this Atlantic trade and set up real trading networks and colonies, with the exception of Spain, who's kind of squanders it all. Portugal kind of goes away when they're taken over. But the Dutch and the English and the French, especially the English and the French, are going to dominate the narrative that you're going to hear for the next few months. Let's see, Nashaya, the key points of the Peace of Augsburg. Again, I have a video on the Peace of Augsburg, which goes through this and sort of what leads up to it. But the key points, I would say there's one key point to the Peace of Augsburg, and that's that princes in the Holy Roman Empire have the ability to choose whether they and their subjects are going to be Lutheran or Catholic. The Latin phrase is escaping me at the moment because it's late, but basically it says who's the ruler, his is the religion, is basically what it is. It's cuius religio cuius rulero. I don't know. It's something like that. Anyway, but that's the idea. Is it legitimizes Lutheranism. It really kind of brings to an end the conflict of religion in the Holy Roman Empire, until some people in the Holy Roman Empire want to become Calvinist, throw some Catholic emissaries from the Holy Roman Emperor out of a window in Prague, and start a very, very bloody 30 Years' War, which is well named the 30 Years' War. But for now, the Peace of Augsburg is going to sort of settle this Lutheran thing and give people a choice. Joshua, how did the Spanish discovery in silver in Potoca, I think you mean Potosi, affect the economy of Spain and Europe? Well, initially it was a huge boon for Spain because they had all this money that they could spend, all this wealth. But as they began to spend it, and as they spent it on trying to fight off the forces of the Protestant Reformation and to secure Catholicism throughout Europe, they just simply put too much silver into circulation. And as they put too much silver into circulation, then the value of that silver went down, which meant that prices went up, and you have what's called the price revolution. These prices rise. Your normal people find it much harder to get their hands on goods, and it collapses the Spanish economy because of that. Quinn, as we have more, I like this, questions are starting to pop in right at the time when I've been going for an hour and a half. I don't know how long you guys can put up with this, but we'll see. Quentin says, could you describe the key ideas in the different Protestant group that emerged from the Reformation? Lutherans, Calvinists, Anabaptists, Spiritualists, and anti-Trinitarians. Okay, first of all, you don't need to know spiritualists. You don't need to know anti-Trinitarians. Lutherans, Calvinists, Anabaptists, those are the three that are really big, okay? Here are the very basics. I am in no way getting deep into into like religious dogma and belief here, but here's what you need to know. And if you have more that you want to know, I would encourage you to look it up. I have videos on Lutheranism. I have videos on Calvinism. I don't think I have a video on the Anabaptists, but I think Tom does. Lutherans believe that they believe in two things. First of all, they believe in salvation through faith. That whereas the Catholic Church calls for faith and good works, that like you have to do good things, including sacraments, and you have to have faith. That's the path to salvation. Lutherans sort of kick out the whole good works thing, and they say there's nothing in the Bible that says this. The Gospel of Paul says that that faith alone is what gets you into heaven, and so it becomes sort of their thing. Faith alone is that, and he also pushes the idea of the priesthood of all believers. That there shouldn't be an organized church which is run from a faraway place. Churches should be run by the state, but he meant the local prince should run the particular brand of Lutheranism in that state. Calvinism is different from Lutheranism because Calvinism pushes the idea of predestination. And under the idea of predestination, it works off the logic that God is all-knowing and all-powerful. And as that, God can not only see the present, but he can also see the future. And therefore, he already knows who's being saved and who's not. And so predestination is, sort of like the way things are. We're predestined to do things. Does that take away free will? Maybe. You'll see free will come up. When I decide that, hey, I'm going to go in and do a review session, is this free will, or did God already know that I was going to do this, and so it was sort of predestined? It's a tough one. And then the Anabaptists kind of are on the radical fringe. They are a pacifist group. They advocate for adult baptism. They don't believe that children should be baptized because they don't have the wherewithal to make the choice, and so they push for adult baptism. And then they get kind of like no one likes the Anabaptists during this period, especially when the Anabaptists get a little bit too violent in the city of Munster, and Protestant and Catholic forces have to come and like shut the whole thing down. But the most influential of all of these is Calvinism. Calvinism spreads to all parts of Europe and all parts of the New World. Lutheranism is largely contained to northern Germany, areas of Denmark. It makes its way a little bit into Scandinavia. Anabaptism shows up in small little pockets here and there. Here in Pennsylvania, the descendants of the Anabaptists are here in terms of Mennonites and Amish. But Calvinists are everywhere. Calvinists are Huguenots in France. Calvinists are Puritans in England. Calvinists are Presbyterians in Scotland. I mean, they are the one that Calvin's ideas, because they're easily translated from one place to another, are really like it's the biggest, most influential Protestant group. Can you explain the Columbian Exchange and its effect? And you love, Gene, you love the wrinkled blue background. It shows my imperfection, I think. It's sort of a metaphor. It's an artistic thing, really. No, it's just wrinkled. So the Columbian Exchange. Okay, so the Columbian Exchange was this exchange of new goods. There were things which grew and existed in the New World of the Americas that had never been introduced and didn't exist in any part of the Old World of Europe, Africa, and Asia. And so you have the Columbian Exchange where these goods start to make their way across. Examples. Usually your textbook will have like a map of this, a picture of this. And if you go on my website, like I have one, just sort of show it. But off the top of my head, some of the things that exchange. And I made a video about this. I just haven't edited it and put it together yet. So maybe before your test, I'll get it up. I don't know. Okay, so Colonial exchange. Food gets moved. Food coming from the New World to the Old World include the tomato, the potato, corn, um, chocolate, coffee, those sorts of things. Food going to the Old World, rice, wheat, sugar, that becomes kind of big. It also is the movement of animals. So coming to the New World is like the turkey, the llama. They're not making big inroads here. But that's from the New World to the Old World. Going from the Old World to the New World, you have pigs, chickens, goats, sheep. Horses become huge. They'd never seen a horse before, so it can be used as a draft animal, like pull stuff, but it can also be used for transportation. Many of these sort of like run away and they start reproducing. They make their way up into the plains, central plains of of what is now the United States, and the Plains Indians are able to domesticate them, ride them, and use them in many tribes to be sort of nomadic hunter type people based on that. And then there's disease. And disease is far more an export from Europe because Europeans bring smallpox, they bring mumps, measles, all kinds of these diseases, smallpox being the most important of them all, which devastates and eventually kills an estimated 90% of the population of the New World. The New World gives the Old World syphilis, which is not good, but, you know, given the choice, I'll take syphilis over smallpox any day. Gene also wants to know, was religion a bigger motivation for the age of exploration? Was it as important? Hold on, I just lost it. Was it important as economic motives? This is a subject of great debate between historians. I mean, you want your cynical historian? No, it's all economic. The religion was total cover. They just used it in order to justify what they were doing. You want the true believer historian. These people really did believe that they had a calling from God to convert these people to Catholicism and save their souls. And economics was a nice byproduct of it, but ultimately, to get into heaven, they were going to be converting these people. It's an opinion thing, honestly, and it depends on your outlook on life, and it depends on who you read. So Joshua, thanks for these live videos. Just had the test on the FX. Oh no, you just had the test. I'm sorry. Hopefully, you're finding out that you got a lot of things right. That'd be good. If not, I'm sorry. And another Joshua, do you happen to know what was the first empire the Spanish had set in the New World was? I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, so if you could rephrase that, that would really help. All right, shout out to Emma Jean. I hope that's how you pronounce it. Which religion would you say had the largest impact on Europe? The largest impact on Europe throughout time or during the Reformation. If we're talking throughout time, Catholicism. If we're talking about Reformation, Calvinism. If we're talking about up to the modern day, I would say the religion of science. So, it really depends on what we're asking about. Joshua, what correlation is there between overseas expansion and the developments in Europe? Well, there are a lot of correlations because overseas expansion allows Europe to diversify. I mean, there's so many examples of these things, but one thing that always comes to mind is this. The British build the largest navy in the entire world. The British Navy, in the age of sail, needs huge masts in order to hold their sails. When they find North America and they start to settle North America, they find what are called virgin forests. In other words, they've never really been cut down. So these are huge trees. And so they cut down many of these trees, and they become the masts that create the greatest navy that the world has seen at that time. So there are lots of correlations. You know, there's the wealth, there's religion. It makes people question, you know, beliefs in the New World, the place of Europe in God's creation. All kinds of things are going to go along there. And last question from Gene, good, because I am seriously just about done here. How did innovations in banking promote the growth of urban financial centers and the new economic elite? Gene, we already answered that earlier in the broadcast, like very early in the broadcast, but just as a real quick recap, as you start to have new banking practices, loaning money, the establishment of banks, the establishment of joint stock companies, which allow people to invest in voyages rather than just paying for voyages. They allow the economy to grow, and they create a wealthy group of people who are cash wealthy. They're not just land wealthy, they're cash wealthy. And so they're able to buy lots of luxury goods that are coming from different areas of the world. They're able to commission the best pieces of art and all of that. They create an economic elite that doesn't fit into the social structure which exists, the tripartite social structure, or the three estate social structure of those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. Because they work, but they're far richer than the people, in many cases, far richer than the people who pray or fight, and so it kind of messes with the whole system. So yes, everybody's starting to say their goodbyes, so I think that's probably it. I'm going to go ahead and say my goodbyes. Good luck in AP Euro. Good luck on tests that you have. For those of you who are my students, be ready for tomorrow. Good luck studying. Go over everything. Use my website. Please use my website. And look at my videos. Those will help you understand all of this stuff. And subscribe to my channel. Please. Go do it now. Go subscribe now. Tell your friends. Tell your teacher. Tell your classmates. Even if they're not your friends, you know. Tell them about the channel so that people can help. Or so that I can help people. And next Tuesday, yeah, we'll do it same time, same place, all of that. Next Tuesday, we should be talking about, well, we'll be doing the age of absolutism and looking at absolute rulers and their role. And we'll be talking about the English Civil War and the development of constitutional monarchies in England, or a constitutional monarchy in England. So anyway, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. It has been a real blast. I really do enjoy these things. And again, please subscribe. Please pass on the word. Please watch my videos. Yeah, I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful night. Good night.